Half of all marriages ultimately end in divorce. Yet, what becomes of the remaining half? Many individuals within this group secretly wish their relationships would also conclude. They find themselves seated across from each other at dining tables, engrossed in their phones instead of engaging in conversation. Though they share a bed, their lives unfold in separate domains. They've evolved into strangers, bound by a shared mortgage and a common surname. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher renowned for declaring, quote, zero, offered an even more stark observation on this matter. He contended that what we label as romantic love stands as one of humanity's most destructive falsehoods. Nietzsche posited that humanity has constructed an entire social institution around a transient chemical state, christening it marriage. However, what transpires once this chemical state inevitably dissipates? What remains? And how does this fundamentally flawed chemical phenomenon ultimately lead to marital dissolution? Watch this entire video, and Nietzsche's philosophical insights will illuminate every answer like a match ignited within a dark cavern. Let's commence with what Nietzsche termed the madness of love. Contemporary neuroscience corroborates his suspicions from over a century ago. Falling in love is, quite literally, a transient form of mental aberration. When you encounter someone and experience that initial connection, your brain is deluged with dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. This neurochemical blend engenders elation, obsession, and a complete incapacity to perceive your partner's imperfections. Your cognitive faculties are impaired. You are, in essence, experiencing a rush. Nietzsche wrote, quote, "This madness serves a biological imperative, to propel you towards commitment for reproduction and pair bonding. Nevertheless, it is not engineered for perpetuity. This chemical euphoria typically endures for 18 to 24 months. During this period, couples make monumental life decisions while under the influence of these innate endogenous substances. They cohabitate, get engaged, plan weddings, and merge their financial lives, all while their brains operate outside of their typical baseline function. Consider the sheer absurdity of this situation. You meet someone, become biologically manipulated by your own inherent systems, and then forge legally binding, permanent commitments, while simultaneously unable to think rationally about the individual in front of you. Nietzsche comprehended that what we mistakenly perceive as divine affection is in actuality the subconscious drive for power in a disguised form. It represents your unconscious compulsion to possess, govern, and complete yourself through another individual. You aren't genuinely falling in love with them. Rather, you are enamored with the notion of rectifying your own sense of incompleteness through their presence. However, brain chemistry has no concern for your happiness or compatibility. Its primary objective is reproduction and the continuation of the species. Once its biological mandate is fulfilled, achieving pair bonding for a sufficient duration to produce and safeguard offspring, these chemicals naturally diminish. This explains why every marriage commences with an inherent deception, the conviction that this fleeting, altered state reflects your genuine sentiments for this person. When this high inevitably subsides, couples fail to recognize that they are undergoing chemical withdrawal. Instead, they conclude that something has gone amiss in their relationship. After 18 to 24 months, a noticeable shift occurs. The person who once appeared flawless begins to display imperfections. Conversations that were once electrifying become pedestrian. A touch that once sent shivers morphs into something commonplace. People tend to label this as a relationship failure. Yet, in reality, this phenomenon is chemical tolerance. Much like with any addictive substance, your brain acclimates to the constant influx of love chemicals and ceases to generate the same intense euphoria. Nietzsche had foreseen this in his deep psychological examinations of humanity. He famously observed, "The advantage of a bad memory is that one enjoys several times the same good things for the first time." However, within the confines of marriage, one cannot forget their partner long enough to rediscover them with fresh eyes. During this distinct phase, couples make their initial and most profound error. Instead of understanding that they are experiencing a normal neurochemical adjustment, they misinterpret the waning intensity as definitive proof that something is fundamentally flawed. She believes he no longer looks at her in the same way. He believes she is no longer as entertaining as she once was. Both observations are accurate, yet neither individual grasps the underlying cause. The chemicals that once obscured their incompatibilities have dissipated, exposing fundamental differences that were always present but remained imperceptible during the phase of initial exhilaration. Divergent values, disparate life aspirations, distinct communication styles, and varying expectations, all previously shrouded by the chemical fog. Nevertheless, societal narratives often dictate that this is the precise moment when true love commences, when the initial infatuation fades and a more mature form of love emerges. This is perhaps the most insidious lie of all, as it convinces couples that the dwindling of passion is, in fact, a mark of relational advancement. Nietzsche would identify this as slave morality in action, teaching people to celebrate the diminution of life force as if it were a form of spiritual growth. The cessation of excitement is rebranded as stability. The loss of fervent desire is redefined as deepening intimacy. It is during this crucial period that couples embark on the protracted journey of compromise and accommodation, an act that Nietzsche viewed as tantamount to spiritual suicide. To preserve marital harmony, they begin to suppress their authentic selves, contorting into forms that conform to the demands of the relationship rather than remaining true to their inherent nature. A once adventurous woman becomes cautious because her husband constantly worries. The ambitious man curtails his aspirations as his wife prioritizes predictability. A creative individual forsakes their passions, needing to provide more attention to their partner. What eludes them is that such adaptations gradually erode the very attributes that initially drew them together. The enigmatic allure fades. Independence dwindles. The initial ardor that bonded them slowly suffocates under the strain of sustaining the union. By around the third or fourth year, most pairings have entered what Nietzsche would identify as a form of shared spiritual demise. The neurochemicals once fueling love transition into mere habit, obligation, and routine. This period marks the onset of simmering resentment. It springs not from inherent malice in either individual, but from mourning the disappearance of something they never grasped was inherently fleeting. He resents she is no longer the spontaneous, captivating woman he wed. She resents he is no longer the attentive, romantic man who courted her. Neither recognizes they resent the absence of a chemical state that was fundamentally unsustainable. Nietzsche posited, the individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Yet, in matrimony, the tribe consists merely of two individuals who have consented to subjugate their distinct natures for the partnership's sake. Herein lies the genesis of profound damage. Every concession made during the initial toleration phase now feels like a sacrifice. Each adjustment becomes proof of disproportionate effort. Every stifled desire morphs into a pending grievance. _14_ becomes a bitter refrain. Arguments escalate. The woman who abandoned her career aspirations to bolster his ambitions begins to feel unnoticed. The man who toiled extra hours to support her lifestyle starts to feel undervalued. Both feel they're contributing more than they're receiving, yet neither can articulate the true void, their authentic selves. Nietzsche termed this the triumph of herd morality, the imperative to conform, to be predictable and socially acceptable, eclipses the innate drive for authenticity, power, and freedom. Marriage transforms into a mutual pact to constrict oneself into forms that satisfy societal expectations. But here's the cruel paradox. The more one compromises their genuine self to preserve harmony, the less appealing they become to their partner. They fell in love with your fortitude, your fervor, your self-reliance. When these qualities are sacrificed for the relationship, you evolve into someone they no longer recognize or desire. This phenomenon creates what psychologists term the intimacy paradox. The closer one gets, the more of oneself is lost. The more identities merge, the less distinctive attraction remains. One becomes so familiar that mystery vanishes, so acquiescent that respect erodes, so accessible that desire evaporates. During this stage, couples frequently misinterpret their mutual decline as maturation. They convince themselves they are maturing together, when in fact, they are jointly diminishing. They have conflated harmony with happiness, stability with satisfaction. However, Nietzsche understood that anything that saps life force is not mature, but decadent. The gradual spiritual death resulting from accepting weakness as wisdom, settling as strength, and resignation as responsibility. This is typically when infidelity begins. Not because individuals are immoral, but because the human spirit rebels against spiritual death. When passion at home dies, it seeks revitalization elsewhere. The ultimate phase Nietzsche labels the revolt of the slaves. This occurs when individuals who have long suppressed their authentic selves finally challenge their self-diminishment. This is when marriages don't just conclude, they violently rupture. All the accommodations made to preserve the relationship become ammunition in the battle to dismantle it. Affairs surface, financial betrayals come to light. Years of stifled resentment finally erupt. The person who was meant to be their partner now symbolizes everything they surrendered to maintain the pretense of love. But what's truly unfolding is each person's attempt to erase the evidence of their own self-betrayal. They aren't merely fighting their former spouse, they are now battling the version of themselves that consented to be less than they were. The explosion is so savage because it's not solely about ending a relationship. It's about striving to annihilate the person they became within that relationship. They aim to destroy the weak, compromised, diminished self that marriage forged. This explains why divorce frequently elicits behaviors that astonish everyone acquainted with the couple. These are not inherently evil individuals. These are individuals attempting to resurrect their authentic selves by demolishing the institution that entombed them. Children become pawns in this psychological warfare. Custody disputes transform into efforts to punish the other person for years of perceived injustice. Monetary possessions transform into instruments of retribution rather than practical partitions. Crucially, the man forfeits half of his amassed fortune, meticulously built over years of striving. Conversely, the woman acquires it purely by virtue of being the spouse, often having contributed negligibly to its accumulation. The husband, who toiled ceaselessly for his family, seeks to reclaim his autonomy through aggressive legal actions. Both individuals endeavor to retrieve what they relinquished during the initial, chemically driven phases of their bond. However, one cannot reclaim vanished moments, abandoned aspirations, or neglected authentic identities through judicial procedures. Nietzsche would perceive this devastation as the unavoidable consequence of constructing a life upon the falsehood of everlasting love. When a partnership is founded on the delusion of completeness, when genuineness is sacrificed for accord, when ease is prioritized over progression, eventually, reality demands its recompense. This retribution frequently manifests as the dismantling of everything initially sought to be protected by compromising one's true nature. The tragedy isn't the dissolution of the marriage, but rather that two once whole individuals allowed an institution, predicated on a chemical illusion, to fragment them into diminished versions of their former selves. We can now grasp the full scope of why most marriages fail when viewed through Nietzsche's uncompromising perspective. Matrimony compels individuals to make unwavering pledges based on fleeting brain chemistry. It mandates that individuals surrender their true identities for the sake of an establishment that promises stability but delivers spiritual demise. The elevated divorce rate is not a moral failing. It signals that humans inherently resist systems that deplete their vitality. Quote 16, Nietzsche wrote, "Yet marriage, as currently structured, frequently achieves the opposite. It debilitates both partners by demanding they relinquish the very attributes that rendered them uniquely powerful." The answer doesn't lie in superior marital counseling or firmer commitment. The solution is recognizing that an enduring bond cannot be forged on the bedrock of transient chemistry. Nietzsche's ideal, the Übermensch, does not marry to achieve wholeness. They engage with others to share their existing completeness. They do not seek rescue or salvation through relationships. Rather, they offer enrichment and advancement. This necessitates assuming absolute responsibility for one's own well-being, one's own purpose, one's own significance. It involves becoming so self-sufficient that the validation of another person is not required for one's existence. When relationships are approached from this position of strength, everything transforms. One is not seeking someone to fill an emptiness. One is seeking someone who values one's fullness. One is not attempting to resolve existential issues through partnership. One is inviting someone to partake in an already fulfilling life. Relationships built on this foundation are chosen daily, not constrained by contracts. They are predicated on mutual upliftment rather than mutual reliance. They can conclude without destroying either individual, because neither person's identity is contingent upon the relationship. This prospect frightens most people, because it demands abandoning the perceived security that marriage offers. However, Nietzsche asserted that security is the adversary of greatness, that comfort impedes growth, and that the endeavor to render permanent what is intrinsically temporary invariably leads to decay. So, why do most married couples ultimately divorce? Because their union was constructed upon a chemical falsehood. They made enduring legal commitments while under the temporary sway of neurochemical shifts designed for procreation, not perpetual compatibility. When the chemical allure faded, they discovered they were married to strangers. When they attempted to sustain connection through compromise and concession, they gradually extinguished the very qualities that initially fostered attraction. When the burden of their shared diminishment became intolerable, they erupted in resentment instead of acknowledging the systemic flaw within the institution itself. The 50% who do not divorce are not necessarily happier. Many are simply ensnared by financial, social, or practical limitations that render escape impossible. They signify not the triumph of marriage, but its most cruel failing. Two individuals who have consented to cease evolving together rather than confronting the disarray of authentic individual development. Nietzsche would contend that the high divorce rate is, in fact, encouraging. It implies that people still retain sufficient vitality to resist systems that curtail them. It means people still dare to defy the conventional. It means the human spirit continues to combat spiritual death, even if it entails severing relationships they once believed they desired. The issue is not that people lack sufficient commitment to make marriage succeed. The issue isn't a lack of dedication in individuals striving to make a marriage successful. Instead, the inherent flaw lies in the institution of marriage itself, which demands commitments that clash with fundamental human psychology and neurobiology. Enduring affection cannot be founded on transient neurological states. Genuine rapport cannot be forged by suppressing one's true identity. Passion isn't born from routine, nor is attraction sustained by constant familiarity. The climbing divorce rates aren't signaling the impossibility of love. They are revealing the impossibility of our current approach to it. With the illuminating perspective of Nietzsche's philosophy, the full picture emerges. Marriage falters because it is rooted in a slave morality, championing sacrifice, compromise, and obedience as virtues, rather than acknowledging them as forms of spiritual demise. It offers security in exchange for abandoning authenticity, happiness for the annihilation of personal strength, and love for the elimination of mystery and independence. However, nature teaches that authentic power stems from self-mastery, not self-sacrifice. True love emanates from plenitude, not emptiness. A lasting bond requires two whole individuals who choose to elevate each other, not two incomplete beings attempting to find wholeness through fusion. The future of human relationships doesn't depend on mending marriage. It lies in moving beyond the need for institutional confirmation of personal bonds. This involves loving without legal agreements, committing without constraints, and connecting without the false assurance of permanent arrangements that promise to stabilize what is inherently fluid and dynamic. Such an approach demands a level of courage that most individuals lack, a readiness to love without guarantees, to connect without asserting control, and to commit without limitations. It necessitates becoming so fully developed within oneself that you offer genuine love rather than seeking it, and are so secure in your own identity that you don't require another person to validate your worth. When you achieve this stage of personal evolution, what Nietzsche termed becoming who you are, relationships undergo a profound transformation. They evolve into celebrations of choice rather than expressions of need. They enrich your life instead of completing it. They foster personal growth instead of guaranteeing security. And if they conclude, they do so cleanly, without the bitter resentment that often accompanies divorce, because neither individual's fundamental self was compromised for the relationship's sake. This represents Nietzsche's core insight regarding love and marriage. Cease attempting to use others to resolve problems that only individual development can address. Stop expecting institutions to provide what only inner strength can generate. Quit seeking security in structures that demand the decay of the very qualities that make you charismatic and vibrant. The remedy for the divorce crisis isn't improved marriages. It's stronger individuals who don't rely on marriage to feel complete, valuable, or loved. We began by asking why most married couples eventually divorce. Through Nietzsche's philosophical lens, the answer becomes starkly clear. Marriage collapses because it's built on the falsehood that temporary chemical reactions signify permanent emotional realities. It asks people to make lifelong commitments amidst neurochemical shifts designed for short-term pair bonding, not enduring compatibility. When this chemical intensity inevitably wanes, couples discover they've legally bound themselves to strangers, swayed by biological programming that no longer dictates their feelings. The compromises and adjustments they make to sustain the connection gradually erode their authentic selves, wiping out the very characteristics that initially sparked attraction. The bitterness that accumulates from this mutual reduction eventually erupts into the psychological warfare we label divorce, as each person tries to expunge the evidence of their own self-betrayal. Couples who avoid divorce often languish in quiet despair, trapped by practical obligations, living as emotional strangers who share only routines, duties, and regrets. This is not a moral failing. It's a systemic issue within an institution that contradicts basic human psychology and neurochemistry. The solution isn't about perfecting marriage, but about transcending the need for institutional validation of personal connections. It involves becoming so self-sufficient that you can love from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, choice rather than dependence, and strength rather than weakness. This is the guiding light of Nietzsche's philosophy, illuminating the darkness of humanity's most persistent and damaging misconception, that authentic, enduring love can be built on transient brain chemistry and permanent legal documents. The divorce rate isn't the problem itself. It's merely a symptom. Understanding this symptom is the crucial first step toward creating something superior. Should this deep dive into the philosophy behind marital unions and their dissolution have unveiled previously unnoticed dynamics, feel free to contribute your perspectives below. Among the stages of the chemical breakdown, which one most closely mirrored your own journey?